I never thought I'd be standing in the parking lot of First National Bank at 7 in the morning, holding a stack of documents that would destroy the man I'd spent 25 years building up. The morning sun cast long shadows across the asphalt, and my hands trembled slightly as I clutched the manila envelope containing loan applications, business contracts, and a detailed financial strategy that would systematically dismantle everything Marcus Thompson thought he owned. Just 48 hours earlier, I'd been Lisa Chen, the devoted partner who sacrificed her own dreams to fund his. Now I was someone else entirely, someone Marcus had created with 4 simple words that would haunt him forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The security guard unlocked the bank doors, and I was the first person through them. 25 years of marriage, of pouring my salary into his ventures, of believing in his vision while my own ambitions collected dust in a drawer somewhere between his second failed startup and his third brilliant idea. All of it had led to this moment, standing at a teller window with enough evidence of financial misconduct to turn his American dream into an American nightmare. The story begins on a Tuesday morning in March, when Austin was just starting to shake off the last remnants of an unusually cold winter. Cedar Park was coming alive with the sounds of suburbia, lawnmowers humming and coffee makers brewing in kitchens across our neighborhood. I was standing at our granite kitchen island, the one Marcus had insisted we couldn't afford when I'd first suggested it, 8 years ago, but somehow found the money for when his tech startup landed its first major client. The irony wasn't lost on me that morning, as I watched him scroll through his phone while mechanically eating the steel-cut oats I'd prepared, just the way he liked them, every single morning for the past decade. Marcus sat at our breakfast table in his signature outfit, a navy button-down that I'd picked out and paid for, khakis that I'd had tailored because he never had time for such mundane tasks, and the expensive watch I'd surprised him with last Christmas. His dark hair was perfectly styled with the pomade I ordered online, because the local stores never carried the specific brand he preferred. Everything about his appearance screamed success, from his manicured nails to his Italian leather shoes. What struck me that morning, as I observed him with unusual clarity, was how much of that success was actually mine. "Lisa, have you seen my presentation folder?" he asked without looking up from his phone, his voice carrying that particular tone of mild irritation he reserved for domestic interruptions. The red one with the Innovate Tech logo. I knew exactly where it was because I'd assembled it myself the night before, organizing his pitch materials, printing the charts he'd created, binding everything with the professional care that had become second nature after years of being his unpaid administrative assistant. "It's in your briefcase," I replied, continuing to pack his lunch in the insulated bag I'd bought specifically for his important client meetings. "Along with the backup copies of everything, your business cards and the mints you like." He grunted in acknowledgement, still focused on his phone. I could see the reflection of his screen in the kitchen window, and he wasn't reviewing his presentation or answering urgent email. He was scrolling through LinkedIn, probably checking the profiles of competitors or potential investors, the same ritual he performed every morning while I orchestrated the practical details of his life. "The Peterson meeting is at 10, he said, finally looking up but not quite at me, more toward the general vicinity of where I stood. "If this goes well, we're looking at a $2 million investment round. Derek thinks we can close it by Friday." Derek Walsh, his business partner and the only person Marcus seemed to truly respect, had become a frequent topic of conversation in our house. Derek the visionary, Derek the strategist, Derek the one who understood the market better than anyone else. I'd heard these proclamations countless times, usually followed by request for me to transfer more money into their business account or to postpone some expense in our personal lives, because the company needed capital. "That's exciting," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I still wanted Marcus to succeed. His dreams had become so intertwined with my identity that his victories felt like mine, even when they came at my expense. "Did you remember the revised financial projections I stayed up finished?" "Of course," he said, though I could tell by his expression that he'd forgotten entirely. "They're in the folder, right?" I nodded, choosing not to mention that I'd had to recreate them from scratch because he'd accidentally deleted the original file and hadn't backed it up, or that I'd spent 3 hours researching comparable companies to make sure our numbers were competitive, or that I'd called in a favor with my friend Jennifer Brooks, who worked in financial analysis, to double-check the calculation. Marcus stood up, straightening his shirt and checking his reflection in the kitchen window. He looked good, confident, like someone who deserved investment and success. What the reflection didn't show was the woman standing behind him, the one who'd made it all possible, the one who'd sacrificed her own marketing career to provide the financial stability that allowed him to chase his entrepreneurial dream. "I should be home by 7, he said, grabbing his briefcase and the coffee I'd prepared in his thermal mug. "Diana's coming over tonight. Right?" Diana Rodriguez had been my closest friend since college, one of the few people who remembered who I'd been before I became Marcus's support system. She was a successful attorney who'd built her own practice from the ground up, and her visits always left me feeling both inspired and slightly melancholy about the path I'd chosen. "She's bringing takeout from Hill's Cafe," I confirmed. "The usual Tuesday night thing." Marcus nodded absently, already mentally transitioning to his business day. He paused at the kitchen doorway, and for a moment I thought he might say something personal, something that acknowledged the effort I put into making his life run smoothly. Instead, he checked his watch and said, "Don't wait up if the meeting runs late. Sometimes these investor dinners go on forever." The front door closed behind him with a sound that seemed more final than usual, though I couldn't explain why. I stood in the kitchen for several minutes afterward, surrounded by the evidence of my morning routine, his empty bowl in the sink, coffee grounds scattered on the counter, the newspaper folded to the business section he'd been reading. The house felt different without his presence, not necessarily better or worse, just different, quieter, more like mine. I'd been working at Meridian Creative Group for 15 years, starting as an entry-level coordinator and gradually working my way up to senior marketing coordinator. It wasn't the career trajectory I'd once imagined, back when I'd graduated with my MBA and grand plans to start my own agency. But it was steady, reliable income that had kept our household afloat through Marcus's various entrepreneurial phases. The job paid well enough to cover our mortgage, utilities, groceries, and Marcus's business expenses, with just enough left over for modest savings. That morning at work felt different too, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. I sat at my desk in the open plan office downtown, reviewing campaigns for our biggest client, a regional restaurant chain that was expanding into Dallas. The work was engaging, the kind of strategic thinking I'd always enjoyed, but I found myself distracted by thoughts of Marcus's presentation, and whether the Peterson meeting would finally be the breakthrough he'd been promising for the past 3 years. Jennifer Brooks stopped by my desk around 11, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the break room. "You look like you could use this," she said, settling into the chair beside my desk. Jennifer was one of those people who had an uncanny ability to read moods, probably a skill she'd developed during her years in financial analysis. "Just thinking about Marcus's big investor meeting today," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. $2 million if it goes well." "That's the same amount he was talking about 6 months ago," Jennifer observed gently, "and 9 months ago." "I'm not trying to be negative, but have you ever wondered what would happen if you put that kind of energy into your own career?" The question caught me off guard, not because it was inappropriate, but because it voiced something I'd been thinking about more frequently lately. "What do you?" "I mean, you have an MBA from UT, 15 years of experience, and you're essentially running point on some of our biggest accounts. Paul Mitchell has been dropping hints about the creative director position that's opening up next quarter. That's a significant salary bump, plus equity in the company." Paul Mitchell was our department head, a sharp strategist who'd built Meridian from a small local firm into a regional power. The idea that he'd been considering me for a promotion was news, and the timing felt strangely significant. "I hadn't heard anything about that," I said carefully, "because you never put yourself forward for anything," Jennifer replied with characteristic directness. "You're so busy supporting Marcus's dreams that you don't advocate for your own." Her words lingered with me for the rest of the day. During lunch, instead of my usual routine of checking in on Marcus via text, I found myself researching the creative director role, looking at salary ranges and job descriptions. The numbers were impressive, enough to change our entire financial dynamic, enough to make me less dependent on Marcus's success and more invested in my own. I was still thinking about the conversation when I got home that evening. Diana was already there, having let herself in with the spare key I'd given her years ago. She was unpacking takeout containers from Hill's Cafe in our dining room, the one we used for special occasions and Tuesday night dinners with friends. "Lisa, perfect timing," she called out as I walked through the front. "I got extra guacamole because I know how much you love it, and they had that cilantro lime rice you mentioned wanting to try." Diana Rodriguez was everything I'd once planned to become: successful, independent, confident in her own skill. She'd built her law practice specializing in business contracts and financial disputes, the kind of work that paid well and commanded respect. At 43, she owned her downtown loft, drove the car she wanted, and traveled whenever the mood struck her. More importantly, she'd never compromised her ambitions for anyone else's dreams. "How was the big investor meeting?" she asked as we settled at the table. "Marcus texted me around 3, saying it was going better than expected, whatever that means." I realized I hadn't heard from Marcus all day, which was unusual when he had important meetings. Typically he'd send updates throughout the day, sharing his excitement or frustration depending on how things were progressing. "I haven't talked to him since this morning," I admit, "but he seemed confident." Diana raised an eyebrow but didn't comment directly. Instead, she asked about my work, about the restaurant campaign I'd been developing, about whether I'd heard anything about potential promotion. Her questions felt more pointed than usual, as if she were conducting an informal interview about my life. "Jennifer mentioned that Paul might be considering me for creative director," I said, testing how the words sounded out loud. "It would be a substantial raise, plus equity." "That's fantastic news," Diana said, her enthusiasm genuine. "You've been ready for that kind of role for years. What's holding you back?" The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. "Well, Marcus's business is at a critical stage. If Innovate Tech takes off the way he thinks it will, we won't need the extra income, and the creative director position would mean longer hours, more travel, more responsibility. It might interfere with supporting the startup." Diana set down her fork and looked at me with the expression she typically reserved for clients who were about to make terrible legal decisions. "Lisa, can I ask you something? And will you promise to really think about your answer?" I nodded, though something in her tone made me nervous. "When was the last time Marcus supported one of your dreams, the way you support his?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I opened my mouth to defend Marcus, to list examples of his support, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself remembering all the times I'd mentioned wanting to start my own agency, and how the conversation always shifted to Innovate Tech's needs. All the times I'd suggested we take a vacation, and how the money was always needed for business expenses. All the times I'd talked about taking additional classes or attending conferences, and how the timing was never quite right. "That's different," I said finally. "His business is our business. When Innovate Tech succeeds, we both benefit." "Do you though?" Diana asked gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been subsidizing his dreams with your career for the better part of a decade, and I'm not seeing much return on that investment." Before I could respond, we heard Marcus's car in the drive. Diana and I exchanged glances, and she seemed to make a conscious decision to lighten the mood as the front door opened. "Ladies, I hope you saved some food for the future millionaire," Marcus announced as he entered the dining room. His energy was electric, the kind of high that came from successful meetings and promising conversations. He looked younger somehow, more confident than I'd seen him in months. "The meeting went well, I take it?" Diana asked with a smile that didn't quite reach her eye. "Better than well," Marcus said, loosening his tie and settling into the chair at the head of our table. "Peterson is in for the full $2 million, and he's bringing in 2 other investors for an additional $3 million. We're looking at a $5 million Series A round, which is triple what we'd originally planned." The numbers were staggering, and I felt a familiar rush of excitement mixed with relief. Finally, after all these years, after all the sacrifices and investments, and late nights, Marcus's vision was becoming reality. "That's incredible," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so proud of you." "This changes everything," Marcus continued, his words coming fast with excitement. Derek and I can hire a proper development team, get real office space, maybe even start looking at acquisition targets. We're talking about being acquisition targets ourselves within 2 years. Diana asked the practical questions that I should have thought to ask: timeline for the investment, terms of the deal, what it meant for Marcus's role in the company. As he explained the details, I found myself calculating what this could mean for our lives. No more watching every expense, no more choosing between my professional development and his business needs. Maybe I could finally take that sabbatical I'd been dreaming about, travel to Southeast Asia like I'd planned before we got married. There's just one small complication, Marcus said as we were finishing dinner. His tone had shifted slightly, still excited but with an edge of something else. The investors want to see complete financial transparency, both business and personal. They're doing comprehensive due diligence, which means they'll be looking at everything: our tax returns, bank statements, credit reports, the whole 9 yards. That's standard for this level of investment, Diana said, slipping into her attorney voice. Most investors want to make sure there aren't any personal financial liabilities that could impact the business. Exactly, Marcus said, but he was looking at me now with an expression I couldn't quite read. Which brings me to something we need to discuss. The shift in his tone made my stomach tighten. What kind of discussion? Marcus took a deep breath, the kind that preceded difficult conversations. The investors are concerned about the appearance of our financial structure, the fact that most of our household income comes from your job, and that you've been the primary source of funding for Innovate Tech, creates what they call an unfavorable narrative for potential acquisition targets. What does that mean? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I didn't want to know the answer. It means they want to see me as the primary breadwinner and financial decision-maker in our household, Marcus said carefully. They think the current arrangement makes me look financially dependent, which doesn't align with the CEO image they want to promote. Diana's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down harder than necessary. Are you suggesting that Lisa should quit her job to make you look more successful to investors? Not quit, Marcus said quickly, but maybe step back, take a less prominent role. The creative director position Jennifer mentioned, for example, might not be the right move right now. It would look like I can't support my wife's career advancement, which could raise questions about my own earnings potential. The room went completely silent. I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ear. After 25 years of supporting Marcus's dreams, after funding his ventures with my career success, he was asking me to diminish my own achievements to enhance his image. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said slowly, my voice unnaturally calm. You want me to turn down a promotion that would increase my salary by 40% and give me equity in a successful company, so that your potential investors don't think you're financially dependent on your wife? It's temporary, Marcus said, his tone becoming defensive. Once the funding comes through and Innovate Tech starts generating serious revenue, you can pursue whatever opportunities you want. This is just about getting through the due diligence process. And in the meantime, Diana asked with dangerous quiet. In the meantime, Lisa continues doing what she's been doing, supporting the household, supporting the business, just maybe keeping a lower profile professionally. I stared at Marcus, this man I'd loved and supported for 25 years, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The excitement I'd felt about his success evaporated, replaced by a cold clarity that was both terrifying and liberating. So let me see if I have this right, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word. For 25 years, I've funded your dreams with my career. I've paid our mortgage, our bills, your business expenses. I've turned down opportunities, worked late to cover your responsibilities, and sacrificed my own ambitions to ensure you had the freedom to chase your. And now, when you're on the verge of the success we've both been working toward, you want me to step aside, so you can take credit for the financial stability I've provided. That's not what I'm saying, Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Then what are you saying? Marcus looked uncomfortable, glancing between Diana and me, as if hoping for support from an unexpected source. I'm saying that sometimes we have to make strategic decisions that benefit the bigger picture. This investment could set us up for life, Lisa. We're talking about generational wealth. Isn't that worth a few months of keeping your head down? The phrase keeping your head down hung in the air like a slap. After everything I'd done, all the ways I'd propped up his dreams and ambitions, he was asking me to make myself smaller so he could appear larger. You know what, Marcus? I said, standing up from the table. You're absolutely right about one thing. Someone has been financially dependent in this relationship for the past 25 years, but it wasn't me. Lisa, that's not fair, he said, standing as well. We're a team. We've always been a team. A team where one person does all the work and the other person takes all the credit. I replied, that's not a team, Marcus. That's called having an employee. Diana was watching this exchange with the focused attention of someone who'd witnessed many relationship conflicts in her professional life. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the concern in her eye. I think maybe we should all take a step back and cool down, she suggested diplomatically. This is a big decision, and maybe it deserves more discussion when everyone's had time to think. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I don't need time to think about this. I've been thinking about it for years without realizing it. Marcus's face had taken on a red flush that usually appeared when he felt cornered or criticized. Lisa, you're being dramatic. This is business, not personal. Everything about our relationship has been your business, Marcus. My career, my money, my time, my energy, all of it has been in service of your business, and now you have the nerve to stand in our dining room, eating food I paid for, and tell me that my 25 years of sacrifice have created an unfavorable narrative for your invest. That's not what I meant, he said, but his tone was shifting from defensive to angry. You're twisting my words. Am I asked, because it sounds to me like you're asking me to become invisible so you can pretend you built this success on your own. The accusation hit its mark. Marcus's expression hardened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. You know what your problem is, Lisa, he said. You can't stand the idea that I might finally be successful without needing you to hold my hand through every step. You've gotten so used to being the responsible one, the one with the stable job and the practical plans, that you can't handle me becoming the primary earner. That's ridiculous, I said, but something in his tone was making my heart race. Is it? Marcus asked, warming to his theme. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're threatened by my success, like you preferred it when I needed your financial support because it made you feel important, and now that I'm about to surpass everything you've achieved professionally, you're finding excuses to undermine it. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd sacrificed, every dream I'd deferred, every opportunity I'd declined in service of his ambitions, he was suggesting that my support had been motivated by some need to keep him dependent. Marcus, Diana said sharply, I think you need to be very careful about what you say next. But Marcus was beyond careful. He was angry now, and the anger seemed to be fueled by years of resentment I'd never suspected existed. No, Diana, I think it's time someone said this out loud, he continued, his voice rising. Lisa has spent so many years being the responsible one, the practical one, the one who keeps everything together, that she's forgotten how to be anything else. She's become so comfortable in the role of my caretaker that she can't imagine being with a man who doesn't need taking care of. Stop, I said quietly, but he didn't hear me. Do you know what Peterson said to me today? Marcus asked, his eyes bright with a kind of vindictive energy. He said he was impressed by my independence, by the fact that I'd bootstrapped the company without relying on family money or outside support. He respected that I'd built something from nothing, and you know what I realized? That's exactly what I've done. I've built Innovate Tech despite having a wife who sees every risk as a threat, every ambitious plan as irresponsible dreaming. Marcus, stop talking, Diana said firmly, but he was beyond listening. You want to know the truth, Lisa, he said, turning to face me fully. You're not my support system, you're my nightmare. You're the voice in my head that says, I can't do it, that I need to be practical, that I should be grateful for whatever small success I can manage.
You're the reason I've been playing it safe for 25 years instead of taking the kinds of risks that actually build wealth." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Diana's intake of breath was audible. The clock in the kitchen kept ticking, but everything else seemed to have stopped. Marcus seemed to realize what he'd said, because his expression shifted from anger to something approaching alarm. "Lisa, I didn't mean." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You meant every word." I walked out of the dining room, leaving Marcus and Diana sitting at the table surrounded by the remains of our dinner. I could hear him trying to explain himself to Diana, could hear her sharp responses, but their voices seemed to be coming from very far away. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed. Marcus and I had shared for 25 years and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back at me appeared calm, almost serene, but I could see something new in her eyes, something that hadn't been there an hour ago. Marcus had called me his nightmare, after 25 years of sacrificing my dreams for his, of funding his ventures with my career, of believing in his vision even when it cost me opportunities and advancement. He saw me as the obstacle to his success. Well, if Marcus thought I was his nightmare, he had no idea what real nightmares looked like, but he was about to find out. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was crying or raging or falling apart the way Marcus probably expected, but because my mind was working with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I lay in our king-sized bed, listening to Marcus toss restlessly beside me, and methodically catalogued every financial detail of our shared life, every bank account, every investment, every business expense I'd funded over the past 25 years. Marcus had called me his nightmare. The word echoed in my head, but instead of pain, it brought focus. If he wanted to see what a real nightmare looked like, I was more than capable of providing one, but this wouldn't be emotional destruction or petty revenge. This would be surgical, strategic, and completely legal. By morning I had a plan. Marcus left early for what he called a follow-up meeting with the Peterson Group, avoiding eye contact and mumbling something about needing to clarify some points from yesterday's discussion. I suspected he was hoping that time and distance would allow yesterday's conversation to fade into something we could both pretend hadn't happened. He was wrong. I called in sick to work, something I hadn't done in over 3 years. Jennifer Brooks expressed concern when I texted her, offering to bring soup or help with anything I needed. I assured her it was just a migraine and that I'd be fine by tomorrow. Technically, it wasn't entirely a lie.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I did have a headache, but it was the kind that came from spending 8 hours staring at financial documents and bank statements spread across our dining room table. The first thing I did was gather every piece of financial documentation in our house: tax returns dating back 10 years, bank statements, investment portfolios, business contracts, loan applications, credit card statements. Marcus kept meticulous records for his business, but he'd always left our personal finances to me. He had no idea how much ammunition he'd given me over the years. The picture that emerged was exactly what I'd suspected, but had never allowed myself to acknowledge fully. Over the past 25 years, I had contributed approximately $8 million to our household expenses and Marcus's various business ventures. My salary had covered our mortgage payments, totaling $380,000, household expenses averaging $48,000 per year, and direct investments in Innovate Tech and its predecessors, totaling $200,000. Meanwhile, Marcus's contributions had been sporadic at best, usually just enough to maintain the illusion that he was contributing equally to our partnership. More damaging was what I discovered about Innovate Tech's current financial structure. According to the documents Marcus kept in his home office, the business was technically owned 50-50 between Marcus and Derek Walsh. But according to the bank records I'd been managing, 87% of the company's operational funding had come from our joint accounts, which meant from my salary. Marcus had essentially been using my money to purchase his share of a company he claimed to have built independently. The Peterson investment, if it materialized, would make Marcus and Derek millionaires, but the intellectual property, the client relationships, and the foundational technology had all been developed using my financial contribution. Under Texas property laws, I had a legitimate claim to a significant portion of Innovate Tech's value, regardless of what the corporate paperwork said. Around noon, Diana called to check on me. "I've been thinking about last night," she said without preamble. "Marcus was completely out of line. What he said to you was unacceptable." "He showed me who he really is," I replied, stacking bank statements into chronological order. "I'm actually grateful for the clarity. How are you holding up? Do you want me to come over?" I considered the offer. Diana's legal expertise would be invaluable for what I was planning, but I wasn't ready to reveal the full scope of my intentions yet. "I'm fine. Better than fine. Actually, I'm focused. That's what worries me," Diana said with characteristic honesty. "You sound too calm for someone whose husband just called her his nightmare." "Maybe because I'm finally seeing the situation clearly," I said. "Marcus wants to be financially independent. I'm going to help him achieve that goal." The tone of my voice must have conveyed something that alarmed her, because Diana's next words came carefully. "Lisa, whatever you're thinking, maybe we should talk it through first. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but don't do anything you can't undo." "I'm not planning to do anything illegal," I assured her. "Just something that ensures Marcus gets exactly what he's asked for." After we hung up, I spent the afternoon researching Texas business law, specifically the regulations governing spousal financial contributions to business ventures. What I discovered was fascinating. In community property states like Texas, any business developed during a marriage using marital assets could be subject to division in divorce proceedings. But more relevant to my current situation was the fact that financial contributions, made under false pretenses, could constitute grounds for civil litigation. Marcus had repeatedly represented Innovate Tech to investors as his independent creation, funded through his own resources and risk-taking, but the financial records told a different story. If those investors knew that the business had been primarily funded by spousal income, they might reconsider both the investment and Marcus's credibility as a CEO. I was still researching when Marcus came home that evening, his mood considerably more subdued than it had been that morning. He found me in the kitchen, where I was preparing dinner as if nothing had changed between us. "Lisa," he said carefully, "about last night, I think we should talk." "Absolutely," I agreed, my voice pleasant and accommodating. "But let's eat first. You must be hungry after your meeting." Marcus looked relieved that I wasn't immediately launching into recriminations or emotional confrontation. He settled at the kitchen island while I finished preparing his favorite meal, chicken parmesan with the expensive imported cheese he preferred. I poured him a glass of the wine I'd been saving for special occasions, and listened as he told me about his day. "Peterson confirmed the $5 million investment," he said, his enthusiasm returning as he warmed to the topic. "They want to close within 60 days, which is incredibly fast for this kind of deal. Derek and I are meeting with their legal team next week to finalize terms." "That's wonderful news," I said, and I meant it. Marcus's success would make what came next so much more satisfying. "I assume they'll want to review all the financial documentation we discussed." "Exactly," Marcus said, taking a sip of wine. "Which brings me back to what we talked about yesterday. I know I didn't express myself well, but I hope you understand why the creative director position might not be the right timing." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his perspective. "I've been thinking about that too. You're right that we need to present the right image to investors." Marcus visibly relaxed, probably interpreting my response as capitulation. "I'm glad you see it that way. This is temporary, Lisa. Once Innovate Tech is established and generating revenue, you can pursue any opportunity you want." "Of course," I agreed. "In fact, I've been thinking about how we can make your financial independence even more convincing to Peterson's team." "What do you mean?" I served his dinner and sat across from him at the island, maintaining the same pleasant demeanor I'd cultivated throughout our marriage. "Well, if they're concerned about the appearance of financial dependence, we should probably restructure our accounts to show clear separation between your business income and my employment income. That way, when they review our finances, they'll see that Innovate Tech has been operating independently of my salary." Marcus paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "How would that work exactly?" "Simple accounting separation," I said casually. "We could set up distinct business and personal accounts, maybe even restructure some of our existing investments to show clear ownership divisions. I've been looking into it, and there are several strategies that would make your financial independence much more apparent to outside reviewers. That sounds complicated, Marcus said slowly. Not really. I've already done most of the research. Texas law makes it relatively straightforward to separate community property assets when there's a business involved. We could even formalize some of the loans I've made to Innovate Tech over the years, converting them to documented business debt rather than spousal support. That would actually strengthen your company's credit profile. Marcus was looking at me with growing confusion. Lisa, you haven't made loans to the company. You've been supporting our household while I built the business. Actually, I said, maintaining my pleasant tone while reaching for the folder of documents I'd prepared. According to the bank records, I've made substantial direct contributions to Innovate Tech's operating accounts over the past 5 years, a total of $240,000, to be precise. I slid a neatly organized summary across the counter to Marcus. His expression changed as he scanned the numbers, his complexion growing pale as the implications became clear. These transfers were household contributions, he said carefully. Money for business expenses, office rent, equipment purchases. That's not the same as loans. Legally, it's exactly the same as loans, I replied, especially when the money came from my individual income rather than our joint asset, and particularly when the recipient business was owned by someone other than the contributor. Marcus set down his fork, his appetite apparently vanishing. Lisa, what are you trying to say? I'm saying that if you want to present yourself to investors as financially independent, we should probably formalize the actual financial structure of your business, including the debt obligations you've incurred to develop it. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus stared at the documents, and I could almost see his mind working through the mathematics. If my contributions to Innovate Tech were classified as loans rather than gifts, the company would suddenly have significant debt obligations. Debt that would need to be disclosed to investors and potentially repaid before any acquisition or investment could proceed. You can't be serious, he said finally. I'm completely serious, I replied. You've made it clear that my financial support has been more of a hindrance than a help to your success. This would give you the opportunity to prove that Innovate Tech can succeed without any connection to my income. But if we restructure everything as debt, it could complicate the Peterson deal. They might want to see those obligations satisfied before they invest. Then you'll need to find a way to satisfy them, I said simply. Maybe Derek can contribute more capital, or you can secure a bridge loan. I'm sure a brilliant entrepreneur like yourself can figure it out. Marcus was staring at me as if he'd never seen me before. Lisa, this would destroy everything we've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I corrected gently. You made it very clear last night that Innovate Tech is your achievement, not ours. I'm simply helping you ensure that the financial records reflect that reality. This is insane, Marcus said, standing up abruptly. You're talking about sabotaging my business because you're angry about something I said in the heat of the moment. I'm not sabotaging anything, I replied, my voice remaining calm and reasonable. I'm protecting my own financial interests, something I should have been doing all along. Marcus began pacing around the kitchen, his agitation growing. Lisa, you can't do this. We're married. We're supposed to be on the same team. We were on the same team, I agreed, until you decided that my contributions were hindering your success rather than enabling. Now I'm simply acting in my own best interests, the same way you did when you asked me to turn down the creative director position. That's completely different, Marcus protested. How so? Because that was about presenting the right image to invest. This is about destroying our future out of spite. I stood up and began clearing the dinner dishes, maintaining the domestic routine that had become so automatic over the years. Marcus, let me ask you something. How much do you think Innovate Tech is worth right now, before the Peterson investment? Derek and I estimated about $2 million, he said cautiously. And how much have I contributed to its development over the past 5 years? Marcus was silent. $140,000 in direct contributions, I continued, plus the indirect support of covering all household expenses while you focused on the business. If we calculate the opportunity cost of my foregone career advancement, we're probably looking at close to $500,000 in total contribution. Those weren't investments, Marcus said desperately. Those were family expenses. Household contributions. You can't retroactively change the nature of financial support you willingly provided. Actually, I can, I said, turning to face him with a smile that didn't reach my eye, especially when the recipient of that support has explicitly stated that it was unwanted and detrimental to his success. Marcus sank back onto the kitchen stool, his head in his hands. Lisa, please, let's talk about this rationally. I am being rational, I said. For the first time in 25 years, I'm thinking about my own financial security instead of yours. What do you want? He asked quietly. It was the first time Marcus had asked that question in recent memory. What did I want? I'd spent so many years defining my desires in terms of his success that the question felt foreign. I want recognition, I said finally. I want acknowledgement of what I've contributed to Innovate Tech's development. And I want assurance that if this business succeeds, I'll receive appropriate compensation for my investment in it. What kind of recognition? Equity, I said simply. Based on my financial contributions, I estimate I should own approximately 12% of Innovate Tech. I want that ownership formalized in the corporate structure. Marcus's face went completely white. 12%? Lisa, that's impossible. Derek and I own the company 50-50. There's no room for additional equity distribution. Then you and Derek will need to dilute your holdings proportionally, I said. Or alternatively, one of you can purchase my stake at fair market value based on Peterson's investment terms. Do you have any idea what you're asking for? Marcus said, his voice rising. 12% of a $5 million company is $600,000. Even if we wanted to buy you out, we don't have that kind of cash. Then I suggest you accept my partnership, I replied. I think I'll make an excellent business partner. After all, I've been Innovate Tech's primary financial supporter for years. It's time that relationship was formalized. Marcus stared at me in horror, finally understanding the full scope of what I was proposing. You're trying to force your way into my business. I'm claiming my rightful place in a business I helped build, I corrected. There's a difference. Diana put you up to this, Marcus said suddenly. This sounds like legal strategy, not emotional reaction. Diana doesn't know anything about this, I said truthfully. This is my decision, based on my analysis of our financial records and my understanding of Texas business law. But you've been planning this, Marcus accused. This isn't something you came up with overnight. You're right, I admit. I've been thinking about our financial relationship for months. Last night just gave me the clarity I needed to act on those thoughts. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing toward the kitchen window. Lisa, this would change everything. Derek would never accept a third partner, especially not one who's married to his co-founder. It would complicate every business decision, every investor relationship, every strategic direction. Then maybe Derek should have thought about that before accepting $240,000 in funding from his co-founder's wife, I said. Or maybe you should have thought about it before calling that wife your nightmare. The reference to last night's conversation seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. He turned back to me with desperation in his eyes. Lisa, I was angry. I said things I didn't mean. You know I value everything you've done for us. Do I? Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you value what I've done for you, only as long as it doesn't interfere with the narrative you want to present to the world. That's not true, Marcus protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Prove it, I said simply. Accept my partnership in Innovate Tech. Give me the recognition I've earned. Treat me as an equal contributor to the success you're about to achieve. And if I don't, the question hung in the air between us, loaded with implication. I could see Marcus calculating, trying to figure out what leverage I actually possessed, what I could realistically threaten. If you don't, I said calmly, then I'll exercise my legal rights under Texas community property law. I'll formalize my contributions to Innovate Tech as secured debt, which will need to be disclosed to Peterson's investment team. I'll file claims against the business for unpaid obligation, and I'll ensure that any potential investors understand exactly how your supposedly independent company was actually funded. Marcus's face had gone from pale to gray. That would kill the Peterson deal. It would certainly complicate it, I agree. But I'm sure a resourceful entrepreneur like yourself can find alternative funding sources. Maybe Derek has family money he could contribute. Maybe you could secure traditional business loans. There are lots of options for someone who doesn't want to be financially dependent on his wife. Lisa, please, Marcus said, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely frightened. Let's find a compromise. There has to be a middle ground here. There is, I said. 12% equity in Innovate Tech, or buyout at fair market value. Those are my terms. I need to talk to Derek, Marcus said weakly. Of course, I agreed. But Marcus, I should mention that I've already consulted with an attorney about formalizing my debt claim. If we can't reach an agreement on equity participation by Friday, I'll be filing the appropriate paperwork on Monday morning. The timeline gave Marcus exactly 5 days to figure out how to integrate me into Innovate Tech or find 600. Given that the Peterson investment was scheduled to close within 60 days, the timing would force him to make difficult choices quickly. You've really thought this through, Marcus said, slumping against the kitchen counter. I've had 25 years to think it through, I replied. I just finally decided to act on it. Marcus looked at me as if he was seeing a stranger. What happened to the woman I married? She grew up, I said simply. She realized that supporting someone else's dreams doesn't require abandoning her own interests. Marcus left the house that evening without saying goodbye, presumably to call Derek and begin the process of figuring out how to respond to my ultimatum. I spent the rest of the night organizing my documentation and researching business partnership structure. By the time I went to bed, I had a comprehensive understanding of exactly what 12% ownership of Innovate Tech would entitle me to: voting rights, profit participation, and input on major business decisions. For the first time in months, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. I woke up the next morning feeling more energetic and focused than I had in years. Marcus hadn't come home the night before, but I found a text message on my phone saying he was staying at Derek's apartment to work through the implications of our conversation. I made coffee for one person and sat at our kitchen island, reading the business section of the Austin American-Statesman while planning my day. I had appointments to keep with Paul Mitchell about the creative director position I'd decided to pursue regardless of Marcus's objections, and with Tom Anderson, a financial advisor Diana had recommended for high-net-worth individuals. My phone rang as I was finishing breakfast. Marcus's name appeared on the screen and I answered with professional courtesy. Good morning, I said pleasantly. Lisa, Derek wants to meet with you, Marcus said without preamble. His voice sounded strained, as if he hadn't slept. He thinks we should discuss this situation in person. I'd be happy to meet with Derek, I replied. When and where? This afternoon, at his office. 2 o'clock, I'll be there, I confirmed. Should I bring my attorney? There was a pause. Do you think that's necessary? I think it's advisable, I said. We're discussing a significant business transaction. Everyone should have proper representation. Lisa, Marcus said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. This doesn't have to become adversarial. It's not adversarial, I replied calmly. It's professional. I'm pursuing my legitimate business interests, the same way you and Derek pursue yours. After we hung up, I called Diana and explained the situation. Her response was immediate and decisive. I'm coming with you, she said. And Lisa, I need you to understand something. What you're doing is legally sound, but it's also incredibly risky. If Marcus and Derek decide to fight this, it could get ugly very quickly. I know, I said, but Marcus made a choice when he called me his nightmare. Now he gets to live with the consequences of that choice. And if he agrees to your terms, are you prepared to be Derek's business partner? Because from what you've told me about him, he's not going to be thrilled about this development. I've been supporting Innovate Tech from the outside for 5 years. It's time I had some influence on the decisions that affect my investment. That afternoon, Diana and I arrived at Derek Walsh's office in the Domain, a sleek co-working space that catered to Austin's tech startup community. Derek was waiting for us in a conference room, along with Marcus and a man I didn't recognize who introduced himself as Innovate Tech's corporate attorney. Derek Walsh was everything Marcus aspired to be: confident, successful, and completely self-possessed. At 45, he'd already founded and sold 2 companies, and his personal worth was rumored to be in the 8 figures. He was also, I'd learned from Marcus's stories, completely ruthless when it came to business. Miss Chen, Derek said, standing to shake my hand with professional courtesy that didn't quite mask his irritation. Marcus has explained your concerns about the business structure. I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of your contributions to Innovate Tech. I don't think there's any misunderstanding, I replied, settling into the chair. Diana pulled out for me. I've made substantial financial contributions to Innovate Tech's development, and I'm seeking appropriate recognition for those contributions. The contributions you're referring to were spousal support for Marcus's entrepreneurial activities, Derek said smoothly. That's very different from business investment. Actually, Diana interjected, opening her briefcase and removing a stack of documents. Under Texas law, the distinction between spousal support and business investment depends on several factors, including the nature of the contribution, the understanding of the parties, and the degree to which those contributions enabled business development. Derek's attorney leaned forward. Are you suggesting that Mrs. Chen has legal standing to claim ownership in Innovate Tech? I'm suggesting that Ms. Chen has multiple legal avenues to pursue compensation for her contributions, Diana replied, diplomatically. The question is whether we can reach an amicable resolution that recognizes those contributions appropriately. For the next hour, we negotiated the terms of my participation in Innovate Tech. Derek was initially resistant to any equity distribution, arguing that spousal financial support didn't constitute investment. But as Diana methodically presented the documentation of my contributions and explained the potential complications for the Peterson deal, his position began to soften. Marcus remained largely silent throughout the discussion, occasionally answering questions about the company's financial history, but otherwise deferring to Derek's leadership. I found myself wondering when he'd become so passive in his own business, and whether his partnership with Derek was as equal as he'd always claimed. Let me understand the proposal, Derek said finally. You want 12% equity in Innovate Tech in exchange for releasing any debt claims against the company. That's correct, I confirmed. And if we refuse, then Mrs. Chen will pursue her legal remedies, Diana said simply, which would include formalizing her contributions as secured debt obligations that would need to be disclosed to potential investors. Derek looked at his attorney, who nodded grimly. The debt claims would definitely complicate the Peterson deal, the lawyer confirmed. At minimum, they'd want to see those obligations satisfied before closing. How much are we talking about? Derek asked. $140,000 in direct contributions, I said, plus interest and opportunity costs. Derek did the mathematics quickly. So we're looking at roughly $300,000 in potential debt obligations. At minimum, Diana confirmed, versus 12% equity in a company Peterson values at $5 million. Derek continued, which would be worth $600,000. But with voting rights and ongoing profit participation, I added, I'd be a partner, not just a creditor. Derek leaned back in his chair, studying me with new attention. Mrs. Chen, can I ask you something directly? Of course. What do you actually want here? Is this about money, or is this about something else? The question caught me off guard with its directness. I glanced at Marcus, who was staring at the conference table as if it held answers to questions he hadn't thought to ask. I want recognition, I said finally. I want acknowledgement that Innovate Tech's success is built on my contributions as well as Marcus's vision, and I want assurance that if this company succeeds, I'll benefit proportionally to my investment in it. And you think equity participation is the way to achieve? I think it's the only way to achieve that, I replied. For 25 years I've supported Marcus's entrepreneurial activities with the understanding that we were building something together. Now I want that partnership to be legally formalized. Derek nodded slowly. I can respect that, but I need you to understand something. Business partnerships are complicated, especially when they involve personal relationships. If you become my partner, I'll expect you to contribute more than historical financial support. I'll expect active participation in business decisions, strategic planning, and day-to-day operations. I wouldn't expect anything less, I said. I have an MBA and 15 years of marketing experience. I think I can add value beyond my financial contribution. Actually, Derek said, glancing at his attorney, that raises an interesting point. If you're joining as an active partner rather than just a financial contributor, we might be able to structure this as a larger equity position in exchange for ongoing operational involvement. Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that if Lisa is going to be a partner, she might as well be a real partner, Derek said, Marketing and business development are areas where Innovate Tech could use additional expertise. If she's willing to take on substantial operational responsibilities, we could justify a larger equity position. How much larger? Diana asked. 15%, Derek said, after a moment of calculation, but with the understanding that Lisa would be taking on significant business responsibilities. This wouldn't be passive ownership. I felt a thrill of excitement that surprised me. What kind of responsibilities? Chief Marketing Officer Derek said, responsible for brand development, customer acquisition, investor relations, and business development. Full executive authority over marketing strategy and budget. The offer was larger than anything I'd dared to hope for. Not just recognition of my past contributions, but genuine partnership in Innovate Tech's future development. I'd want that role and those responsibilities formalized in the partnership agreement, I said carefully. Absolutely, Derek agreed, along with appropriate compensation. Of course, the CMO position would carry a six-figure salary in addition to equity participation. Marcus was staring at Derek as if he'd lost his mind. Derek, are you seriously offering my wife a senior executive position in our company? I'm offering your wife a partnership position that reflects her contributions and capabilities, Derek replied calmly. If she's going to own 15% of Innovate Tech, she should have responsibilities commensurate with that ownership. But this would change everything, Marcus protested. The whole structure of the company, the decision-making process, the investor relationships. Yes, it would, Derek agreed. It would also solve several problems we've been facing in business development and marketing, and it would give us access to Lisa's financial acumen, which frankly has been supporting this company more effectively than either of us has been willing to acknowledge. I looked at Marcus, whose expression had shifted from confusion to something approaching panic. What do you think? I asked him directly. I think this is insane, Marcus said quietly. Yesterday we were married partners, and today you're demanding to become my business partner too. Actually, I said, feeling a clarity that surprised me, I think this might be exactly what we both need. How so? You've been frustrated by what you see as my practical limitations on your business ambitions, I said, and I've been frustrated by my lack of influence over decisions that affect my financial investments. This way we're both directly involved in Innovate Techs, but we'd be working together every day, Marcus said weakly. We'd be working toward the same goals, I corrected. Something we haven't been doing for quite a while. Derek looked between Marcus and me with professional assessment. I need to know if you two can work together effectively. Personal relationships can complicate business decisions. Our personal relationship is already complicated, I said honestly. At least this way our professional relationship would be clearly defined. Lisa, Marcus said, are you sure about this? Once you're a partner in Innovate Tech, there's no going back to the way things were. I don't want to go back to the way things were. I don't want to go back to the way things were, I replied. That's the whole point. Derek stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I need to discuss this with our attorney and run some numbers. But Lisa, I think we might have the foundation for a very interesting partnership. As we left Derek's office, Diana pulled me aside. Are you sure you know what you're doing? This is a lot more complicated than just getting recognition for your financial contributions. I know, I said, but for the first time in 25 years, I feel like I'm building something for myself instead of just supporting someone else's vision. And Marcus, how do you think he's going to handle working with you as a partner instead of a support? I looked back at Marcus, who was standing by his car looking shell-shocked. I guess we're both about to find out. That evening, Marcus and I had our first real conversation in days. He came home around 8, looking exhausted and slightly defeated. So, he said, settling heavily onto our living room couch, it looks like you're going to be my business partner. How do you feel about that? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring out the window toward our backyard. Honestly, terrified of working with me. Of you, he said simply. I've never seen this side of you before. This strategic, calculating version of Lisa, who can manipulate business situations and legal frameworks to get what she wants. I prefer to think of it as competent and decisive, I said mildly. It's impressive, Marcus admitted. It's also completely different from the woman I've been married to for 25 years. Maybe because you never gave that woman the opportunity to show what she was capable of, I suggested. Marcus nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been seeing you as my support system for so long that I forgot you might have your own ambitions. I never forgot, I said. I just put them aside for yours. And now I'm going to pursue mine alongside yours, I said. As your partner, not your support. Marcus looked at me with something that might have been respect. Derek thinks you'll be good at this. He was impressed by how you handled the negotiation. Were you? I was terrified, Marcus said honestly. But yes, I was impressed too. You outmaneuvered both of us completely. I simply pursued my legitimate interests, I said. Something I should have been doing all along. Lisa, Marcus said, carefully. What happens to us, to our marriage? It was the question I'd been avoiding, the one that lay underneath all the business negotiations and legal strategy. I don't know, I admitted. I think we need to figure out who we are as partners before we can know who we are as a couple, and if we can't work together, then at least I'll have 15% of a successful company, I said, with a smile that was only half joking. Marcus laughed despite himself. You really have thought of everything, haven't you? I've had a good teacher, I said. You've been showing me how to be strategic and ambitious for 25 years. I just finally decided to apply those lessons to my own life instead of yours. As we sat together in our living room, the space we'd shared for so many years, I realized that everything between us was about to change. The dynamic that had defined our relationship, the roles we'd played, the assumptions we'd made about each other and ourselves. Marcus had called me his nightmare, but what he'd actually done was wake me up from a dream I hadn't realized I'd been living. Tomorrow, I would start the process of becoming Chief Marketing Officer of Innovate Tech. I would begin building something for myself, with my own hands, and my own vision. And Marcus would have to learn to see me not as his supporter or his obstacle, but as his equal. Whether our marriage survived that transformation remained to be seen. But for the first time in 25 years, I was more excited about my own future than I was worried about his. Walking into Innovate Tech's offices on my first day as Chief Marketing Officer felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The sleek co-working space in the domain buzzed with the energy of ambitious startups, and I could feel the curious stares of other entrepreneurs as Derek introduced me to our corner of the floor. Marcus walked slightly behind us, his discomfort palpable as he watched me claim space in what had been his exclusive domain for years. Your office is here, Derek said, opening the door to a glass-walled space that overlooked the Austin skyline. I had our facilities team set up everything you requested, including the dual monitors and the whiteboard wall. The office was beautiful, modern and completely mine. For the first time in decades, I had a professional space that reflected my own taste rather than compromising with someone else's needs. I'd chosen a standing desk, ergonomic seating, and a small meeting area with comfortable chairs that invited collaboration. The contrast with Marcus's office across the hall was striking, where his space was all dark wood and traditional furniture, meant to project established authority. Mine was light, flexible, and forward-thinking. Thank you, I said, running my hand along the smooth surface of the desk. This is perfect. Lisa, we need to discuss your first priorities, Derek said, settling into one of the meeting chairs. The Peterson investment is still our primary focus, but with you joining as CMO, we have the opportunity to accelerate some initiatives we've been putting on the back burner. Marcus joined us, taking the chair furthest from mine. The physical distance felt symbolic of the emotional chasm that had opened between us over the past week. We were still legally married, still sharing a house and a bed, but we were navigating each other like polite strangers. What kind of initiatives? I asked, pulling out the notebook I'd brought for taking strategic notes. Brand development, for starters, Derek said. Innovate Tech has grown organically, but we've never invested in professional marketing or brand positioning. Peterson's team mentioned that our market presence feels informal compared to our technical capabilities. I nodded, already formulating ideas. What's our current marketing budget? Essentially zero, Marcus admitted. We've been relying on word of mouth and Derek's industry connection. That explains why your revenue has plateaued, I said, making notes. You're limiting growth to your existing network instead of building scalable customer acquisition systems. Derek leaned forward with interest. What would you recommend? Complete brand overhaul, I said without hesitation. Professional website redesign, content marketing strategy, thought leadership positioning, strategic partnerships, and a comprehensive digital presence. Based on what I've seen of your technical capabilities, you should be dominating conversations in the enterprise software space. How long would that take? Derek asked. 6 months for full implementation, but we could see measurable results within 8 weeks if we prioritize correctly, I replied. I'd want to start with competitive analysis and customer research to identify positioning opportunities your competitors are missing. Marcus was staring at me as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. Lisa, this sounds like you're talking about completely changing our business approach. I'm talking about amplifying your business approach, I correct. You've built excellent technology, but you're terrible at communicating its value to potential customers. That's fixable. Derek was nodding enthusiastically. This is exactly what we need. Marcus, why didn't you tell me Lisa had this kind of strategic insight? The question hung in the air uncomfortably. Marcus had never really asked about my professional capabilities, because he'd never seen me as anything other than his personal support system. My marketing expertise, my strategic thinking, my ability to analyze market dynamics, had all been invisible to him because they didn't directly serve his immediate need. I guess I never thought about it, Marcus said quietly, which was probably the most honest thing he'd said about our relationship in years. Well, think about it now, Derek said with characteristic directness. Because if Lisa can deliver half of what she's describing, we're looking at serious competitive advantages in the market. Over the next several hours, Derek and I mapped out a comprehensive marketing strategy for Innovate Tech. I found myself energized in ways I hadn't experienced since my early career, when I'd first discovered my aptitude for strategic thinking and creative problem solving. Derek was an excellent collaborator, asking insightful questions and building on ideas in ways that pushed my thinking to new levels. Marcus participated in the planning session, but his contributions felt perfunctory, as if he were going through the motions of engagement without really understanding what we were discussing. I began to wonder if his discomfort stemmed from seeing me in a professional context where I was clearly competent and confident, traits he'd somehow never associated with me, despite 25 years of merit. I think we should start with the website redesign, I said, sketching a rough timeline on the whiteboard. Our current site looks like it was built in 2015, which doesn't inspire confidence in a technology company. I know a designer who specializes in B2B tech companies, and she could have mock-ups ready within 2 weeks. Budget? Derek asked. $30,000 for the complete overhaul, including content strategy and SEO optimization. That's a fraction of what established companies spend, but it's enough to create something genuinely competitive. Approved, Derek said immediately. What else? Content marketing infrastructure, I continued. Blog, case studies, white papers, video content. We need to establish thought leadership in enterprise software optimization. I'm thinking weekly technical articles, monthly industry analysis pieces, quarterly trend reports. Who would write all that? Marcus asked. I would coordinate content creation, but we'd leverage your technical expertise and Derek's industry knowledge, I said. Plus, I have connections with freelance writers who specialize in technology content. Derek was taking notes rapidly. This is brilliant. What kind of timeline are we looking at for seeing results? Web traffic should improve within 6 weeks of launching the new site, I said. Lead generation should increase within 3 months. Brand recognition and industry positioning will take longer, maybe 6 to 9 months, but once it takes hold, it creates sustainable competitive advantages. And cost, I'd been calculating as we talked, total investment of about $75,000 over 6 months. But if we're successful, we should see revenue increases that more than justify the expense. Marcus was looking increasingly overwhelmed. Derek, that's a significant investment for initiatives we've never tried before. It's a tiny investment compared to the Peterson funding, Derek replied. And honestly, Marcus, this is the kind of strategic thinking we should have been doing years ago. The comment stung,
and I could see Marcus processing the implication that Derek thought I brought capabilities to innovate tech that Marcus had been unable to provide. The power dynamics in their partnership were shifting, and not in Marcus's favor. I think we should move forward with everything Lisa's proposed, Derek continued, but I want weekly progress reports and clear metrics for measuring success. Absolutely, I agree. I'll have a comprehensive project plan with timelines and benchmarks ready by Friday. As the meeting concluded, Marcus lingered while Derek headed back to his office. Lisa, can we talk privately? I nodded, closing my notebook and settling back into my chair. What's on your mind? This, Marcus said, gesturing around the office. All of this, you're talking about completely transforming Innovate Tech's market approach, and Derek is treating you like some kind of business development guru. I am a business development professional, I reminded him gently. I have 15 years of experience in marketing strategy and brand development. This is what I do, but you've never done it for technology companies, Marcus protested. Actually, I have, I said. 3 of Meridian's largest clients are tech companies. I've been developing marketing strategies for software firms for the past 5 years. Marcus stared at me. I didn't know that. You never asked, I said simply. In 25 years of marriage, you've never once asked me detailed questions about my work or my professional capability. That's not true, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus, when was the last time you asked me about a specific project I was working on? When was the last time you wanted to hear about my strategic thinking or my analysis of market trends? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I always thought of your job as something you did to pay the bills while I built our future. And now I'm realizing that you might be better at building our future than I am, Marcus said quietly. The admission caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness or resentment, not this kind of honest self-reflection. We're both good at different things, I said carefully. You're brilliant at technical innovation and product development. I'm good at strategy and market positioning. That's why partnerships work. But this partnership isn't what I expected. Marcus said, I thought when you join Innovate Tech, you'd be handling administrative tasks or supporting Derek and me. I didn't expect you to come in and start redesigning our entire business approach. Did you expect me to be incompetent? I asked, genuinely curious. Marcus flushed. No, I expected you to follow our lead. The way I've been following your lead for 25 years. That's different, Marcus said automatically, then stopped. Actually, maybe it's not different. Maybe that's exactly the problem. What do you mean? Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk. I think I've gotten so used to you supporting my ideas that I never learned to value your ideas. And now Derek is treating your strategic input like it's more valuable than mine. It's not more valuable, I said. It's different. Derek appreciates different perspectives because he understands that diverse thinking creates better business outcomes. And I don't understand that. I considered the question carefully. I think you understand it, intellectually, but you've never experienced it practically. In our relationship, you've always been the visionary, and I've been the implementer. You've never had to collaborate with me as an equal. And now I do, Marcus said. Now you do, I agreed. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at the Austin skyline. Lisa, I owe you an apology. Not just for calling you my nightmare, but for 25 years of taking your intelligence and capabilities for granted. The apology was more comprehensive than anything I'd expected, and it stirred emotions I wasn't prepared to handle in my new office on my first day as CMO. Thank you, I said simply. That means a lot. Are we going to be able to work together? Marcus asked. Really work together as partners? I think so, I said. But it's going to require both of us to change how we relate to each other. You're going to have to get comfortable with me having opinions that differ from yours, and with Derek sometimes agreeing with my perspective instead of yours, I said. And I'm going to have to get comfortable with asserting my professional judgment, even when it makes you uncomfortable. Marcus nodded slowly. That sounds terrifying. It sounds like growth, I corrected. That afternoon, I dove into research mode.
analyzing Innovate Tech's competitive landscape and identifying market positioning opportunities. The work was absorbing in ways I'd forgotten were possible, engaging every aspect of my strategic thinking and creative problem-solving abilities. By 5 o'clock I had filled 3 whiteboards with competitive analysis, customer journey mapping and brand positioning concept. Derek appeared in my doorway as I was photographing the whiteboards to preserve my work. "How's the first day going?" "Incredibly well," I said, stepping back to survey my analysis. "I think I've identified some significant opportunities that your competitors are completely missing. Such as, enterprise software companies are terrible at explaining their value proposition in human terms," I said, pointing to my competitive analysis. "They focus on technical specifications instead of business outcomes. There's a huge opportunity to position Innovate Tech as the company that speaks both languages." Derek studied my whiteboards with growing enthusiasm. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we need. Marcus and I are both technical people, so we naturally communicate in technical terms. But our customers are business executives who care about results, not processes." "Exactly," I said. "Plus, your competitors are mostly founded and run by men who think like engineers. There's an opportunity to bring a different perspective to market communications. More collaborative, more focused on relationships and outcomes, less focused on technical superiority," I explained. "Most enterprise software marketing sounds like companies trying to prove they're the smartest people in the room. Innovate Tech could be the company that proves it's the most helpful." Derek was nodding rapidly. "That's brilliant. It differentiates us not just in messaging but in actual business approach. And it's authentic to how you actually work," I added. "From what I've observed, both you and Marcus are naturally collaborative and customer-focused. Your marketing should reflect that." "Lisa, I have to ask," Derek said, settling into one of my meeting chairs, "why haven't you been doing this kind of strategic work all along?" This level of thinking could have transformed any number of companies. The question was one I'd been asking myself all day, because I spent 25 years convinced that supporting Marcus's ambitions was more important than pursuing my own. And now I'm discovering what I'm actually capable of when I focus my energy on building something instead of just maintaining it," I said. Derek was quiet for a moment, studying my competitive analysis with professional appreciation. "Marcus is lucky to have you as a partner." "He's lucky to have me as a business partner," I corrected. "Whether he's lucky to have me as a life partner remains to be seen." "Trouble at home," I hesitated, unsure how much personal information to share with Derek. "Let's just say that major changes in professional dynamics tend to create major changes in personal relationships." "Is that going to affect your work here?" "It's going to improve my work here," I said honestly. "For the first time in decades, I'm fully invested in my own professional success, instead of splitting my focus between my career and someone else's." Derek nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever personal changes you're navigating, I hope you know that Innovate Tech is committed to supporting your professional growth. What you've accomplished in one day exceeds what our previous marketing efforts achieved in 2 years." The validation was intoxicating. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my professional capabilities recognized and valued, to be seen as someone who brought unique value rather than just reliable support. "Thank you," I said. "I'm excited about what we can build together." That evening, Marcus and I drove home separately for the first time in years. I'd stayed late to finalize my competitive analysis, and he'd left at his usual time, a pattern that felt symbolic of our shifting relationship dynamic. When I arrived home around 7:30, I found him in the kitchen attempting to prepare dinner, something he hadn't done since the early days of our marriage. "Smells good," I said, noting his efforts with chicken stir-fry, one of the few dishes he'd mastered in college. "I figured I should start pulling my weight around here," Marcus said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Especially if you're going to be working late regularly." "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "How was your afternoon?" "Productive," Marcus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I worked on technical specifications for the Peterson implementation timeline." "Any interesting challenges?" Marcus paused in his cooking, glancing at me with surprise. "You want to hear about technical specification?" "I want to hear about your work," I said. "I always have. You just never seemed interested in sharing details. I guess I assumed you wouldn't understand the technical aspects, Marcus admitted. I might understand more than you think. But even if I don't understand every detail, I'm interested in what you're passionate about. Marcus began describing the technical challenges he'd been working on, and I found myself genuinely engaged with problems I'd never considered before. His enthusiasm for elegant code solutions and system optimization was infectious, and I began to see why Derek valued him as a technical partner. That's fascinating, I said when he finished explaining a particularly complex integration challenge. Have you considered how those technical capabilities could be translated into customer-facing benefits? What do you mean? Well, the system optimization you're describing could probably reduce client processing time by 30 or 40%. That's not just a technical achievement. That's a competitive advantage worth building marketing campaigns around. Marcus stared at me. I never thought about it that way. Technical innovation is only valuable if customers understand its impact on their business outcomes. You and Derek have built something remarkable, but you're not communicating its value effectively. Is that what you were working on today? Figuring out how to communicate our technical capabilities. Among other things, I think Innovate Tech has tremendous potential that's being limited by market positioning and brand development. Marcus served our dinner, moving with the careful attention of someone learning a new skill. Lisa, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? He asked. With this new arrangement, working at Innovate Tech, being my business partner instead of just my wife, the question was more complex than he probably realized. I'm energized, I said finally. I'm more intellectually engaged than I've been in years. Whether that translates to happiness depends on factors beyond just work, such as whether we can figure out how to relate to each other as equals, instead of you needing support and me providing it, such as whether you can be comfortable with me having professional success that's independent of your achievements. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I think today was the first time I've ever seen you in your element professionally. You were completely different at Innovate Tech. More confident, more assertive, more in control. That's who I am when I'm doing work that challenges me, I said. You've just never seen that version of me, because I've been channeling most of my professional energy into supporting your work instead of pursuing my own. And Derek respects that version of you, Marcus observed. Derek respects competence and strategic thinking, I said. Those are professional qualities, not personal ones, but they're qualities I never recognized in you, Marcus said quietly. Because you never looked for them, I replied gently. Because our relationship was structured around me supporting your professional development, not pursuing my own. Marcus pushed food around his plate, clearly processing thoughts he'd never had to consider before. I think I'm going to have to learn how to be married to someone who doesn't need me to take care of her. I think you're going to have to learn how to be married to someone who's your equal, I corrected. That's different from not needing you. How so? Equals choose to be together because they want to be, not because they need to be, I said. Equals contribute different strengths to a partnership without one person being dominant and the other being subordinate. And you think we can learn to do that? I think we're going to find out, I said. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into transforming Innovate Tech's market presence with an intensity that surprised everyone, including myself. The website redesign was completed ahead of schedule, featuring clean, modern design that positioned the company as innovative and customer-focused. I developed content marketing strategies that showcased Derek and Marcus's technical expertise, while translating complex capabilities into business benefits that potential customers could easily understand. The results were immediate and dramatic. Web traffic increased by 400% within 3 weeks of launching the new site. Qualified leads increased by 20. Industry publications began reaching out for quotes and interviews. Derek was invited to speak at conferences where he'd previously been ignored. Lisa, this is incredible, Derek said during our Friday progress meeting. Peterson's team has noticed our improved market presence, and they're talking about accelerating the investment timeline. How much acceleration? I asked. They want to close within 30 days instead of 60, Derek said. Apparently, our enhanced market positioning makes Innovate Tech look like a much safer investment. Marcus was staring at the metrics I'd prepared for our weekly review. These numbers can't be right. We've never had this many inbound leads. The numbers are accurate, I said. Professional marketing generates professional results. But this level of improvement in just 3 weeks, Marcus asked. How is that possible? Because you've been essentially invisible in your market, I explained. Your technical capabilities were hidden behind amateur marketing and non-existent brand development. Once potential customers could find you and understand your value proposition, the response was inevitable. Derek was reviewing the lead quality analysis I'd prepared. These aren't just quantity improvements either. The lead quality is significantly higher than what we were generating through referrals alone. That's because we're attracting customers who are actively looking for solutions rather than waiting for them to stumble across us accidentally, I said. Proactive marketing generates better customers than passive networking. Lisa, I need to ask you something, Derek said, setting down his tablet. What would it take to keep you here long term, beyond just the partnership equity? I mean in terms of professional development and growth opportunities. The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on immediate results that I hadn't thought seriously about long-term career planning within Innovate Tech. What did you have in mind? I asked. Chief Marketing Officer was the starting point, Derek said. But based on what you've accomplished in 3 weeks, I think we should be talking about Chief Operating Officer or even Chief Strategy Officer, someone who's responsible for overall business development, not just marketing. Marcus looked shocked. Derek, that's a massive expansion of responsibility. It's a massive expansion of responsibility that Lisa has already proven she can handle, Derek replied. And frankly, it's strategic planning that Innovate Tech has needed for years, but never had access to. I felt a thrill of possibility that was both exciting and terrifying. What would that role look like practically? Complete authority over business operations, market strategy, customer acquisition, and partnership development, Derek said. Essentially everything except technical development and financial management. That's almost half the company, Marcus said weakly. It's the half of the company that generates revenue, Derek corrected. The half that Marcus and I have been neglecting because we're both technical people who don't naturally think strategically about market dynamics. I looked at Marcus, whose expression had shifted from shock to something approaching fear. How do you feel about that? Honestly, Marcus said, terrified. 3 weeks ago you were my wife who worked in marketing. Now Derek is talking about making you one of the most powerful people in Innovate Tech. I'm still your wife who works in marketing, I said, gently. I'm just doing both of those things more effectively than I was before. But everything is changing so fast, Marcus said. Our relationship, our professional dynamics, the whole structure of my business. Change is only threatening if you resist it, Derek said with characteristic directness. If you embrace it, change creates opportunities. What kind of opportunities? Marcus asked. The opportunity to build a genuinely successful company instead of just a technically competent one, Derek said. The opportunity to work with someone who makes both of us better at what we do. The opportunity to prove that Innovate Tech can scale beyond what any of us originally imagined. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications of Derek's proposal. Finally, he looked at me directly. Lisa, is this what you want? To essentially run half of Innovate Tech? I want to build something meaningful, I said. I want to use my capabilities to create value rather than just support someone else's value creation. If that means running half of Innovate Tech, then yes, I think that's what I want. And what happens to our marriage if you become one of the most powerful people in my business? We figure out how to be married to each other as equals, I said, or we figure out that we can't be. The honesty of my response seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he nodded slowly. I think I need time to process all of this. Take all the time you need, Derek said. But Lisa, I'd like an answer about the Chief Strategy Officer position by next Friday. If you're interested, we can start transitioning responsibilities immediately. As I drove home that evening, I realized that my life had transformed beyond recognition in less than a month. I'd gone from being Marcus's financial supporter to being his business partner to potentially being his professional superior. The woman who'd been called his nightmare was now positioned to become one of the most influential people in his company. The irony was delicious, but it was also complicated. Marcus was struggling to adapt to our new dynamic, and I wasn't sure our marriage could survive the complete reversal of roles we were experiencing. But for the first time in 25 years, I was more excited about my own future than I was worried about his comfort level. If Marcus couldn't learn to be married to a woman who was his equal, then he'd learn what it really meant to have nightmares about losing something valuable. But this time what he'd be losing wouldn't be money or status or business success, it would be me. The crisis came on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Derek had offered me the Chief Strategy Officer position. I was reviewing quarterly projections when Marcus burst into my office, his face flushed with an anger I hadn't seen since the night he'd called me his nightmare. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. Now, I saved my work and turned to face him, noting the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands were clenched at his sides. "What's wrong?" "Peterson's team called Derek this morning," Marcus said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "They want to restructure the investment terms." "What kind of restructuring?" "They want to reduce the valuation by 30%, Marcus said, beginning to pace in front of my desk. "They're claiming that our rapid market expansion indicates previous underperformance rather than genuine growth potential." I felt my stomach drop. A 30% reduction in valuation would significantly impact everyone's equity value, including my own 15% stake. "What's their reasoning?" "Their reasoning," Marcus said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "is that companies don't typically see 400% increases in web traffic and 250% increases in leads, without substantial previous inefficiency. They're arguing that our recent success proves we were fundamentally mismanaging our market opportunities." The logic was flawed, but I could see how investment analysts might interpret rapid improvement as evidence of prior incompetence rather than strategic enhancement. "What did Derek say?" "Derek thinks we should fight it," Marcus said. "He wants to bring in additional investors to create competitive pressure." "But here's the interesting part, Lisa. Peterson's team specifically mentioned that they have concerns about our recent organizational changes." "What kind of concern?" Marcus stopped pacing and fixed me with a stare that felt like an accusation. "They're worried about decision-making authority being concentrated in someone who wasn't part of the original business development." The implication hit me immediately. Peterson's investment team was uncomfortable with my influence in Innovate Tech, viewing me as an unknown quantity who'd gained significant power too quickly. They were essentially questioning whether the company's recent success was sustainable under new leadership. "They're questioning my role," I said, not bothering to phrase it as a question. "They're questioning whether Innovate Tech's recent performance is due to genuine strategic improvement or temporary marketing manipulation," Marcus said. "And they're specifically concerned about decision-making processes that don't align with traditional corporate structure." "Meaning they don't like that Derek consults with me on major business decisions instead of just rubber stamping whatever you recommend," I said, beginning to understand the real nature of Peterson's concern. "Meaning they think you have too much influence for someone who's been with the company for less than 2 months, Marcus replied. "And honestly, Lisa, I'm starting to wonder if they have a point." The accusation stung, partly because I'd been expecting it, and partly because it echoed doubts I'd been having about the sustainability of my rapid rise within Innovate Tech. But it also clarified something important about Marcus's true feelings regarding our new professional dynamic. "You think I have too much influence," I said carefully. "I think you've changed everything about how Innovate Tech operates, and now we're facing consequences for those changes," Marcus said. 3 weeks ago we had a stable business model and a clear path to invest. Now we have rapid growth that investors don't trust and organizational structures they don't understand. We also have 400% more web traffic, 250% more qualified leads, and industry recognition we've never had before," I pointed out. "Those aren't negative consequences. They are if they cost us the Peterson investment," Marcus shot back. $5 million in funding, Lisa. "That's what we're risking because you wanted to prove you could transform our business approach." The accusation was unfair, but it revealed the core of Marcus's anxiety about our changed relationship. He wasn't just worried about the investment, he was worried that my success was threatening his position within his own company. Marcus, the improvements Innovate Tech has experienced aren't marketing manipulation, I said, keeping my voice level despite my growing anger. They're the result of professional marketing and strategic business development. The fact that Peterson's team doesn't understand that says more about their analytical capabilities than about our business model. Or it says that you've created artificial growth that isn't sustainable long-term. Marcus replied, growth that makes the company look more successful than it actually is. The accusation was so fundamentally wrong that I felt my professional credibility being challenged in ways that went beyond our personal relationship. Marcus, do you actually believe that professional marketing creates artificial growth? I believe that dramatic short-term improvements often indicate underlying problems rather than genuine strategic advancement, Marcus said, parroting language that sounded like it came from Peterson's investment team. That's ridiculous, I said, standing up to face him direct. Dramatic short-term improvements indicate that previous approaches were inadequate, not that current approaches are unsustainable. According to you, Marcus said, but you've been here for less than 2 months. Maybe there are aspects of this business that you don't understand yet. The condescension in his tone triggered something deeper than professional disagreement. This wasn't just about Peterson's investment concerns. This was about Marcus's fundamental inability to accept me as his professional equal. What aspects don't I understand? I asked, my voice taking on an edge that surprised both of us. The technical complexity for one thing, Marcus said. The client relationships that Derek and I have been building for years. The industry dynamics that you can't learn from a few weeks of research. Is that why our client retention rate has improved by 40% since I implemented customer success protocols? I asked. Because I don't understand client relationships. Marcus flushed. That's different. How is it different? Because those are administrative improvements, not strategic ones, Marcus said, dismissively. Anyone could implement better customer service procedures. The phrase anyone could hung in the air like a slap. After weeks of professional validation and strategic success, Marcus was reducing my contributions to administrative tasks that anyone could handle. Marcus, I said quietly, do you genuinely believe that the work I've been doing at Innovate Tech is administrative? I think you've made important contributions, Marcus said carefully. But I think Derek has been giving you credit for strategic thinking that's actually just good marketing execution. And you think there's a I think there's a difference between implementing marketing tactics and understanding business strategy, Marcus said. One requires technical expertise and the other requires general skills that most competent people possess. The dismissal was so comprehensive that I felt something fundamental shift in how I saw Marcus and our relationship. He wasn't just threatened by my professional success, he was intellectually incapable of recognizing it as legitimate. I see, I said, sitting back down and opening my laptop. Well, if my contributions are just general skills that anyone could handle, then you and Derek should have no problem managing Innovate Tech's strategic development without me. Lisa, that's not what I meant, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's exactly what you meant, I replied, pulling up the document I'd been working on that morning. And fortunately, it's also easily testable. What do you mean? I mean that if Peterson's investment team is concerned about my influence on Innovate Tech's decision-making, the simplest solution is to remove that influence, I said, typing rapidly. I'll submit my resignation as Chief Marketing Officer effective immediately. Marcus went pale. Lisa, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious, I said, continuing to type. If my contributions are creating instability that threatens the Peterson investment, then the logical solution is to eliminate those contributions. But Derek will never accept your resignation, Marcus protested. Derek will accept whatever solution protects Innovate Tech's investment opportunities. And if Peterson's team is correct that my rapid rise within the company is creating concerns about decision-making authority, then my departure should resolve those concerns. Lisa, stop typing, Marcus said, moving around my desk to see what I was writing. This is insane. You can't resign over one difficult conversation. I'm not resigning over a difficult conversation, I said, continuing to work on my resignation letter. I'm resigning because my business partner has made it clear that he doesn't respect my professional capabilities and considers my strategic contributions to be administrative tasks that anyone could handle. That's not what I said, Marcus protested weakly. It's exactly what you said, I replied. And more importantly, it's what you believe, which means this partnership was never going to work long-term anyway. Marcus was reading over my shoulder as I detailed my reasons for resignation, his panic growing as he realized I was serious about leaving Innovate Tech. Lisa, please, let's talk about this rationally. I am being rational. Pedersen's investment team is concerned about organizational instability created by my influence. You're concerned that my strategic contributions aren't sustainable. Derek's the only person who seems to value what I bring to Innovate Tech, and he'll recover from losing me much more easily than the company will recover from losing $5 million in investment funding. But you own 15% of the company, Marcus said, desperately. You can't just walk away from that. Watch me, I said, adding a clause to my resignation letter that relinquished my equity stake in exchange for repayment of my original financial contributions, plus interest. Marcus stared at the screen in horror. Lisa, if you do this, you'll be giving up hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential returns. I'll be giving up hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential returns from a company where my business partner doesn't respect my professional judgment, I corrected. That's a reasonable trade-off. What about us? Marcus asked quietly. What happens to our marriage if you quit Innovate Tech? I stopped typing and looked at him direct. Marcus, what happens to our marriage if I stay at Innovate Tech and you continue to believe that my professional capabilities are just general skills that anyone could handle? Marcus had no immediate answer, which was answer enough. I finished my resignation letter and attached it to an email addressed to Derek, copying Marcus and Innovate Tech's corporate attorney. I'm sending this to Derek now, I said, moving my cursor to the send button. Unless you have something to say that fundamentally changes your assessment of my professional value to this company. Lisa, wait, Marcus said urgently. Don't send that yet. Let me talk to Derek first. Explain the situation with Pedersen. See if we can find a compromise. What kind of compromise? Maybe you could step back from day-to-day operations temporarily, just until the Pedersen investment closes, Marcus suggested. You could maintain your equity stake and resume active participation once the funding is secure. The proposal revealed everything I needed to know about how Marcus viewed our partnership. When external pressure arose, his instinct was to sacrifice my professional standing to protect his business interests. So when Pedersen questions my influence, your solution is to reduce my influence, I said. When investors express concerns about my role, your response is to minimize my role. That's not a compromise, Marcus. That's capitulation. It's strategic flexibility, Marcus argued. It's adapting to investor requirements to secure funding that benefits everyone. It's throwing me under the bus to save a deal, I corrected. It's exactly what you did when you asked me to turn down the creative director position to make you look more financially independent. Marcus flinched at the comparison. This is different. How is it different? Because this is about external investor perceptions, not internal relationship dynamics, Marcus said. This is about business requirements, not personal preference. Marcus, investor perceptions are based on the information we provide them, I said. If we present my role as temporary or provisional, they'll continue to see it as unstable. If we present my contributions as essential to Innovate Tech's success, they'll view me as an asset rather than a liability. But they've already expressed concerns, Marcus protested. They've expressed concerns based on incomplete information. Derek could address those concerns by presenting comprehensive data about Innovate Tech's performance improvements and strategic development since I joined. Instead, you want to validate their concerns by reducing my authority. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring at my resignation letter on the computer screen. Lisa, I think I'm scared. Of what? Of you, Marcus said, quietly. Of how successful you've become, how confident, how independent. 3 months ago you were my wife who worked in market. Now you're talking about walking away from hundreds of thousands of dollars, rather than accepting any compromise of your professional authority. And that scares you? It terrifies me, Marcus admitted. Because the woman I married would never have done something like this. The woman I married would have found a way to make everyone happy, would have accepted the compromise, would have put my comfort ahead of her own professional standing. The woman you married spent 25 years making you comfortable at the expense of her own growth, I said. Did you prefer her? Marcus was quiet for a long time. Honestly, sometimes I think I did. The admission was painful but not surprising. Marcus had been comfortable with a version of me that prioritized his needs over my own ambitions, and he was struggling to adapt to a version of me that didn't. Then we have a fundamental problem, I said gently. Because I can't go back to being the woman who makes herself smaller so you can feel larger. I know, Marcus said. I just don't know how to be married to someone who's stronger than I am. I'm not stronger than you, I said. I'm just no longer hiding my strength to protect your ego. Marcus nodded slowly, finally understanding the real nature of our changed dynamic. What are you going to do about Derek? I'm going to let him read my resignation letter and make his own decision about how to handle Peterson's concerns, I said. If he thinks my departure will resolve the investment issues, I'll respect that judgment. And if he doesn't want you to leave, then he and I will figure out how to address Peterson's concerns without compromising Innovate Tech's strategic development, I said. With or without your support. My phone rang before Marcus could respond. Derek's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately. Lisa, I just got your resignation letter, Derek said, without preamble. Please tell me this is some kind of negotiating tactic. It's not a negotiating tactic, I said. It's a solution to the concerns Peterson's team has raised about organizational instability. Peterson's concerns are Peterson's problem, Derek said, firmly. Lisa, you've contributed more strategic value to Innovate Tech in 2 months than Marcus and I generated in 2 years. I'm not accepting your resignation, Derek. If my presence is threatening the investment deal, then my departure is the logical solution, I said. Your presence isn't threatening anything, Derek replied. Peterson's team is experiencing buyer's remorse because they're realizing they undervalued Innovate Tech initially. They're trying to renegotiate terms by creating artificial concerns about our business model. Marcus was listening to our conversation with growing confusion. Derek, they specifically mentioned concerns about decision-making authority. They mentioned concerns about decision-making authority because they're looking for excuses to reduce their investment commitment, Derek said. It's a standard investor tactic when they realize they've agreed to terms that are too favorable to the company. So you don't think Lisa's role is creating problems? Marcus asked. I think Lisa's role is the primary reason Innovate Tech is worth investing in, Derek said. Blunt. Peterson's team knows that, which is why they're trying to undermine her authority before closing the deal. The conversation was revealing dynamics I hadn't fully understood. Peterson's concerns weren't genuine strategic worries, they were negotiating tactics designed to create leverage for more favorable investment terms. What do you want to do about it? I asked Derek. I want to call their bluff, Derek said. I want to present them with comprehensive data about Innovate Tech's performance improvements since you joined, along with projections for continued growth under your strategic leadership. If they're genuinely concerned about organizational stability, the data will reassure them. If they're just looking for negotiating leverage, they'll drop the concerns and focus on other issues. And if they maintain their concerns about my role, then we'll find other investors who understand the value of professional strategic development, Derek said. Lisa, Innovate Tech's recent success isn't accidental or temporary. It's the result of strategic planning and professional execution that we should have been doing from the beginning. Marcus was staring at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Derek, do you really think Lisa's contributions are that essential to the company's success? Marcus, Lisa has transformed every aspect of Innovate Tech's market performance in 8 weeks, Derek said, with exasperation. Web traffic, lead generation, customer retention, industry recognition, revenue projections. What part of that isn't essential? I guess I thought those were just marketing improvements, Marcus said weakly. Marketing improvements that increased our company valuation by several $1 million, Derek replied. Marketing improvements that made us attractive to investors who previously ignored us. Marketing improvements that positioned Innovate Tech as an industry leader instead of a regional vendor. The conversation was forcing Marcus to confront the scope of my contributions to Innovate Tech's success. Contributions he'd been minimizing or ignoring because they challenged his sense of his own importance within the company. Derek, I think I owe Lisa an apology, Marcus said quietly. You owe Lisa more than an apology, Derek said. You owe her recognition as a full partner whose strategic judgment is essential to this company's future. And if Peterson's team continues to object to my authority, then Peterson's team can find other investment opportunities, Derek said, firmly. Because I'm not sacrificing Innovate Tech's strategic advantages to accommodate investors who don't understand our business model. After we ended the call with Derek, Marcus and I sat in my office in uncomfortable silence. The crisis had forced both of us to confront fundamental questions about our professional relationship and our marriage that we'd been avoiding for weeks. Lisa, Marcus said finally, I think I've been threatened by your success without realizing it. I know, I said gently. And I think I've been minimizing your contributions, because acknowledging them fully would mean admitting that you're better at business strategy than I am. You're not bad at business strategy, I said. You're just better at technical innovation. Different strengths, but you're better at the kind of strategic thinking that creates sustainable competitive advantages, Marcus said. The kind that investors actually care about. We're both learning what we're actually good at, when we're not constrained by traditional role expectations, I said. Marcus nodded slowly. Lisa, if Derek calls Peterson's bluff and they walk away from the investment, what happens to Innovate Tech? We find other investors who understand the value of professional strategic development, I said. Or we pursue alternative funding options. Or we grow more slowly using revenue reinvestment. And what happens to us if we're working together every day, while trying to figure out how to restructure our marriage? I don't know, I admitted. But I know what happens if we don't try. What? We divorce, I said, simply. Because I can't go back to being the woman who makes herself smaller to protect your comfort, and you can't seem to be comfortable with the woman I actually am. Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing implications that went far beyond business partnerships or investment negotiation. Lisa, I want to learn how to be married to someone who's my equal. I'm just not sure I know how. Neither do I said. But I think we have to try, because the alternative is losing each other entirely. And if Peterson's team forces us to choose between the investment and your role in Innovate Tech, then we choose my role, I said, without hesitation. Because money is replaceable but professional respect isn't. Marcus stared at me, finally understanding that the woman he'd called his nightmare had become someone willing to prioritize her own worth over external validation or financial security. It was a lesson he was about to learn more thoroughly than he'd ever imagined. Derek's confrontation with Peterson's investment team happened 3 days later in their downtown conference room. I sat beside him as he methodically presented 18 months of financial data, performance metrics and strategic projections that told an undeniable story of transformation and growth. Marcus sat across from us, quiet but attentive, finally seeing the full scope of what I'd built at Innovate Tech. These numbers are impressive, Peterson acknowledged, reviewing our quarterly projections, but they represent a dramatic shift from your historical performance pattern. They represent professional strategic development, Derek replied calmly. The kind that established companies invest millions to achieve. Innovate Tech accomplished it in 8 weeks because we brought in someone who understood market dynamics we'd been ignoring. And you're confident this growth is sustainable. I'm confident it's scalable, I interjected, speaking directly to Peterson for the first time. The systems we've implemented aren't dependent on short-term tactics, they're foundational improvements that will compound over time. Peterson studied me with professional curiosity. Mrs. Chen, your background is in marketing, not strategic business development. My background is in strategic business development, I corrected politely. Marketing is just one component of comprehensive market positioning, and you believe you can maintain these performance improvements while expanding operations. I believe we can exceed them, I said confidently. What you're seeing now is just the beginning of Innovate Tech's market potential. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but the outcome was clear within the first 30 minutes. Peterson's concerns about organizational instability evaporated as Derek presented concrete evidence of systematic improvement across every business metric. By the end, they were discussing acceleration of the investment timeline and potential expansion of the funding amount. $5 million at the original valuation, Peterson confirmed as we concluded, with an option for additional funding based on 6-month performance milestones. Derek and I exchanged glances of satisfaction, but Marcus looked stunned. His nightmare wife had just secured the largest investment in Innovate Tech's history while demonstrating capabilities he'd never recognized she possessed. That evening, Marcus and I had our most honest conversation in 25 years of marriage. We sat in our backyard as the sun set over Austin, finally ready to address the fundamental questions our professional partnership had raised about our personal relationship. "I owe you more than an apology," Marcus said, turning to face me directly. "I owe you recognition that I've been wrong about who you are and what you're capable of." "Thank you," I said simply. "Lisa, I think I've been intimidated by your competence for years without realizing it," Marcus continued. "It was easier to see you as my supporter than to acknowledge that you might be more strategically capable than I am." "We're capable of different things," I said gently. "That's what makes partnerships valuable, but I never treated our marriage as a real partnership," Marcus admitted. "I treated it like you were my employee rather than my equal." The acknowledgement was more comprehensive than anything I'd expected, and it opened possibilities I'd been afraid to hope for. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now I learn how to be married to someone who's my professional partner instead of my support system," Marcus. "If you're willing to teach me, are you willing to learn?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. "I'm willing to try, but Lisa, I need you to understand something. This is going to be hard for me. 25 years of thinking about our relationship one way doesn't change overnight." "I know," I said, "but it has to change if we're going to stay married. And if I can't change quickly enough, then we'll figure out how to co-parent Innovate Tech through a divorce," I said honestly, "because I'm not going back to being invisible in my own life." Marcus nodded slowly. "I understand, and I think, maybe for the first time, I actually respect that decision." 6 months later, Innovate Tech had exceeded every projection. Peterson's team had established, our revenue had tripled, our client base had expanded internationally, and we were fielding acquisition offers from companies 10 times our size. I had been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer with equity that reflected my contributions, and Marcus had evolved into an exceptional Chief Technology Officer who collaborated rather than commanded. Our marriage was different too, not perfect, but authentic in ways it had never been before. Marcus had learned to value my professional judgment, and I had learned to pursue my ambitions without apology. We were building something together instead of me supporting something that was his. The morning I stood in that bank parking lot, with documents that could have destroyed Marcus, felt like someone else's life. The woman who'd been called a nightmare had become someone who created dreams instead of deferring to them. Marcus had learned that his real nightmare wasn't having a strong wife, it was losing one. Derek often joked that Innovate Tech's success story should be taught in business schools as an example of what happens when companies tap into overlooked talent. But I knew the real lesson was simpler. Sometimes the person closest to you is exactly the partner you need, if you're brave enough to see them clearly. Marcus never called me his nightmare again. Instead, he introduced me to investors, clients, and industry leaders as his partner. The word meant everything, because for the first time in 25 years it was actually true. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.